We're back with Season 7, Episode 17, To Change a Changeling. This is the episode in which Starlight and Trixie go visit Thorax as a surprise visit at the Changeling Hive, where they discover all is not well. And there's a Malvroof, there we go, I think I got that right, who was there, causing them all sorts of issues and problems. It's okay, they kill it horribly. And then they eat it. And then they eat that. And then... So, this episode was brought to us by Kevin Lapin, who has only ever put out one episode prior to this, which was Honest Apple. Not a great outing. Nevertheless, at least we have a better idea for this episode. The idea of, it's world building, development for changelings, and in general, Thorax in specific, the introduction of Pharynx, and of course, it's a Trixie and Starlight episode, so, woo. This is also, there are no main six in this episode whatsoever. This is the third episode in the entire series to accomplish that fact. Before we go any further, it's time to finally discuss... Disgust? It's time to discuss, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to discuss... continuity. And we give out continuity counters for little moments or highlights of continuity, which are awesome, and it basically add to the enjoyment of a work. And we've done this consistently throughout the whole thing. We're up to, 225 counters, which is quite a few. It's more than Trek would have at this point. That's cool, that's awesome. But what we haven't really discussed yet, and this is the kind of thing we'll be discussing more in the future, is what do we do for an episode that itself is a complete follow-through on previous episodes? Now, we actually could have had this discussion before now, and I'm not sure why we haven't. I can only assume it's because I'm a moron, or because we've had other things to discuss at the time. Because this episode is a continuity episode. This is a follow-through episode. We've got Starlight in general, Starlight and Trixie's shared backstory and friendship and its development. We've got Thorax and his connection to Spike and his connection to the ponies as a consequence. We've got the going to the hive itself and the nature of how the changelings used to be with regards to Chrysalis. They even directly reference the events that were happening. Like, pretty much every single... Oh, I'm sorry, there's also the bit about, I had to convince the changelings to change, which was referenced in literally last week's episode. It's continuity all the way down. How do we rate that? With regards to the continuity counter specifically, I suppose. I mean, we could just go down the list and be like, all right, so we've got Trixie, we've got Starlight. Like, how do we rate that? Unfortunately, it looks like I have no viewers right now. Do I not have chat? Maybe chat's not working. Like, someone say Kefka. Or sub. That works, though. Where are notes? Push this over here, push this over here, push this over here. Write this down from Trapin. Thank you, Trapin. Very much, as always. If you know where you want that sub to go, please let me know. Metroid Dread. Dread. You got it. I mean, we could just count all of the major continuity points and how they are substantial and how they improve the enjoyment of the episode. We could do that. That might get a little silly later on, but at the same time, why wouldn't you? It does help to add to the point. It's the same general mindset that goes into the pluses and minuses. Just because a game keeps doing something good doesn't mean it stops getting credit for it, right? We could also... So Lord Harrowmont and Omni both kind of have the same idea in different expressions there. We could have a big continuity number. We'd have to go back and figure out which episodes. But, so the continuity counter, and then we'd have, the... let's call it the follow-through counter, or the arc counter. And that's how many episodes which are a complete follow-through episode, because we've had a couple before now. The series season finale of Season 3 is a good example of that. That's not a bad idea. What do we call it? Other than follow-through counter. Like, continuity counter just rolls off the tongue, but we could call it... Arc counter kind of works. Because that kind of... as far as the language goes. Arc counter. kind of like that arc counter. So we'll put an arc counter of 1 for now. And each arc counter counts for a lot more. Continuity counters means we have to change this a little bit here. We haven't had counter continuity counters in a long time. I think we've had a couple. We'll just kind of shuffle that up a little bit there. Yep. I like that. Arc counter. Okay, so. So we have the Maul Roof. Yeah, I'd have to go back and figure out which ones would qualify Omni. I could probably do that off the top of my head. Would that include two-parters? No. I wouldn't include two-parters into that. I would only count that if it's a true arc episode as opposed to a literal two-parter. Because the problem is, in terms of both the creative side of things and in terms of the viewing side of things, a two-parter is one episode. We rarely count them as separate episodes, and only then we do so because sometimes, you know, the two episodes were wildly different in quality. So, pretty early on, I remember Act, because we haven't had some in a while. Like, we have had a few. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. I'd have to check the VODs. The plants are regrowing. That is such a fascinating idea. Now, if you don't remember, the barren wasteland around the hive looked like a barren wasteland back in the day, back when Queen Chrysalis was in charge. Now, there were S.A. Ross, that's true. Most of the counter encounter has been character stuff, character assassination stuff, characters acting completely out of character, that kind of thing. The reason I bring this up is not only is this probably the biggest piece of evidence we've ever had that magic is something that encourages life and growth in this setting, because remember, the whole point was that that horrible chunk of death crystal that she had, which apparently is actually discussed in the comics as being from the Chaos Zone or whatever it's called, absorbs all magic nearby and therefore would prevent life from growing, which is a horrifying thought to begin with. I mean, really, think about that for a second. It could also be, in a slightly less horrible way of thinking of it, just a sign of the fact that they haven't... Yeah, basically that rather than being a consequence of the Crystal Throne, that this was something that Chrysalis was doing deliberately as a policy. Remember, one of the things that's pointed out in this episode is, I don't like these vines. They're a hazard, and enemies could hide in them, and they could be used as weapons. Why do we even have them? And you get the implication, that it could be something that was a deliberate choice, that she would regularly send out patrols that would, destroy any sprouts or any blooms or any vines or any growth that had started springing up, to essentially ensure that it remained a barren wasteland. Now, I'm not sure which of those ideas I like better, because they're both fascinating in their own world-building kind of a way. But I kind of think I like the second one better because it's much more character-focused. And it adds just yet another reason why Chrysalis is a disgustingly terrible person, and probably the most evil character we've seen in the entire show so far. I mean, granted, there's not a lot of evil characters in this show. We've got T-Rex, and we've got... T-Rex, excuse me. And we've got Sombra, and we've got her. But... that's messed up. As we discussed in the episode where she was reached, she is a true, straight-up tyrant. Not a dictator. A tyrant. This is someone who rules through tyranny, through fear. And this, again, kind of ties into that idea. This is probably drifting a little bit too much into the weeds, but one of the things that's a demonstrable truth about real-life people is that we tend to be affected by things psychologically that shouldn't affect us physically, that do because of the fact that they're psychologically affecting us. A perfect example of this is light. Now, I've actually brought up several times over in the Star Trek stuff, dimming the lights at nighttime so that people know it's nighttime, right? That's actually a complicated topic I don't want to get into right now. But the general idea is there is a validity to a person, to a person seeing things being dark when it's night. If there's a person who sees light, who is perceived to be out in light and daytime when it's the middle of the night, that will actually affect you because of the psychology of it, right? Am I making any kind of sense here? I'm probably not. The reason I'm bringing all this up is the idea here could be that in addition to literally starving her people, she was probably wanting her terrain to be this vast, barren plain to psychologically starve them. This is your home, this barren, empty husk of a wasteland, and your only hope is to follow me and do what I tell you to do. My take. I've already answered that, Act. I would stand by my statement that that would be Chrysalis, because she's messed up in every way, shape, and form. Now, if you're saying I have to deliberately exclude the villains, I'd have to think about that one. Fluttershy's brother, there we go. I think I've heard of that loner. I haven't seen that show, but... Do I consider Flim and Flam villains? No. I don't consider them well-written characters. Let me walk that back. I don't think most of the episodes they're in are particularly well-written. They're fine. It's just their episodes tend to suck. Anyways, food for thought. Either way, the fact that everything's growing is actually kind of cool. I also really, really love Trixie's expressions as usual. Sorry, the edge of my nose itches, and I hate that. Like right on the bridge right there. You know what I'm talking about? Ah, there we go. Probably Omni. I love the expressions. I love the animation in the show. Starlight fails pretty miserably at fighting a single changeling, which is funny in its own right. But the next thing I want to talk about is, once again, how absolutely brilliant the growth is. I know I literally just finished talking about the plant growth, but I'm not done yet. I'm curious how many of you even thought about this. I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean, this just struck me as I was watching this episode. When we look at terrain in Equestria, it's very, for lack of a better way to put it, orderly. You know, it's because the ponies have mastery of their environment. They make the rain happen. They make the seasons happen, yada yada, right? They literally have mastery of their environment. The changelings don't. The changelings just started having an environment semi-recently. So it's not orderly at all. In fact, if I was to describe it, I'd say, picture any video game ever where you go crawling through ruins, right? You know, that have overgrown, because that's the exact aesthetic they go for. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the artists literally were looking at pictures of, like, whatever games were out at that time, you know, the Horizon Zero Dawn aesthetic, and saying, okay, because that's the style of it, which makes sense. They don't have mastery of their terrain, and they're not doing anything to shape it or guide it. They're just allowing the plant life to grow freely, and that's what it looks like. So I love this aesthetic. I love this presentation, and I love the way that it so clearly visually distinguishes them, both culturally and literally, from the rest of the ponies. And again, we get that whole IDIC, different cultures, different people, still cool, yada yada thing going on, which is one of my favorite things about this show. So, in my notes I just said growth unrestrained. This then leads to probably the second worst part of the episode, which is I was able to convince all of them to change off camera. Okay, that would have been cool to see that. In fact, you know what would have been cooler? I was thinking about it. It would have been cooler if Pharynx was not alone. You don't have to give voices to the other changelings. You don't. Just have it every time Pharynx is there, there's another changeling or two or three who's also with them, and is also psh, 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 right? Basically have him be in charge of what is effectively a gang. Or if you want to put it in more accurate terms, because this would apply here, a faction, a political faction. Because that's what it is. And have them be like, rawr, and so they all move as a group, right? This could even then tie in during the finale when they fight the Maulwurf, or however you say it. Because then, you know, if there's Pharynx and his, like, 5 dudes, and they're like, we can't take this thing alone, but then the other changelings show up, and we got this. I don't know, food for thought. Either way, off camera, yay. And then we find out that they're doing theater, swing dancing, and potlucks, which is kind of cool. Also, they're omnivores, apparently, which makes sense, I suppose. I was wondering what they feed off of other than love, because they eat something, right? Teleportation spell, go! That's not how that works! I know, I have a process. So Pharynx is too much at the start. This is the third worst problem of the episode. The fact that Pharynx is exaggerated in the first act in order to be the kind of... Basically, the episode is slanted. I've talked about slanting before in fiction. The idea here is the episode wants you to not be on Pharynx's side. Now, I will give credit to the episode's writing, because they bother, each time he shows up and does something, they bother to mention that there's a reason behind doing it other than being a dick. A good example is that when he throws the black tar on a changeling, it's to make her look more intimidating to their enemies. Why does he pull down the vines? Because they are a safety hazard for enemies and blah blah. The point is, each time there is at least a reason that's given there, usually in the background. Now, again, he's going way out of bounds, but we'll come back to that. Let's come back to that point in a minute. First, we need to talk about how there's this really great scene, and it's an understated scene, but I love these kind of understated moments in this show, in any show, really. There's a moment where Starlight looks at Trixie, doesn't say anything. And Trixie goes, and Starlight changes her expression, like, huh? And Trixie's like, And with no dialogue, the two have a whole conversation, because the two are close enough to being friends, or I'm saying that wrong, are close enough to each other as friends that they know each other well enough that they can do that they can just have a conversation without dialogue. I know probably 3 people I could do that with off the top of my head in real life. And it's a good way to show that kind of connection. It's a similar thing to what the show has done periodically with Applejack and Rarity, of all characters, who have, you know, such a connection to each other that they don't usually need to discuss this sort of thing. By the way, real talk. I don't know where this started, but my sister and I can have entire conversations that only use the word "huh? Huh? Wow. It's, I used to feel embarrassed about that, and then I found out that apparently we're not alone in that. Plenty of people do that. It's just, you know, you're not supposed to do that in public, because then someone in public just sees you go, "Rah, rah, rah, rah." We know what we're saying. We're conversing. It's just... Thank you, Rosulia, very, very much. Always appreciate those subs. Thank you so much. If you know where you want that to go, please let me know. No, me and my niece speak Minecraft. Because we've done that. Not the same way, not the full conversive way. But we were out having ramen just last Tuesday. This was literally just last week. And... so she said something, I forget what she said, but she was saying something like, you're gonna be a Minecraft villager. And my response to that was, huh. And then so my niece was like, huh? And so I kept going with it, huh, huh. And then she like pulled out her straw, and I'm like, huh. And we just went back and forth like that for like several minutes. It was funny. My niece is adorable. Yeah, so back to the episode, right. So the two of them have such a conversation, or such an understanding, that they don't really need to, you know, speak words. It's awesome. And then Trixie's like, okay, so I'm thinking good pony, bad pony. You blast him with magic while I talk to him. And I'm sorry I'm laughing, but I'm picturing... and then like the camera shifts to the left. You know, have you considered joining the tribe? And then it shifts back... just shifting back and forth between that. You got it, Rosulia. Thank you very much. I am doing better now that the Lorecraft series is concluded. Whoosh. Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about Star Trek. I know I bring up Star Trek so much on the show. What do you want from me? I know Star Trek so well I could reference it off the top of my head without prompting. There's not a lot of things that sit in that category for me. Most stuff I do research on. Yes, it's over. We're done, Von Falkenstein. It's done. It's concluded. It's never going live ever again. Especially not this morning, nor up until, I think it's January 29th, 2023 will be the last episode that goes live. One of the things I ranted about constantly, and have never let go of, was early TNG, and a lot of TNG and DS9 in general, had this approach where the Federation doesn't know what the word diplomacy means. Now, for those of you who haven't seen my Star Trek stuff, what I mean by that is they think the word diplomacy means the word appeasement. Rolling over and just bending over as far as you can to allow people to just walk all over you. Yeah, bend over backwards diplomacy, exactly. And that is, it's interesting because, first of all, it's dumb and stupid for many reasons. But second of all, that's exactly what the changelings are doing here. If you pay attention to their approach, it's what Thorax was doing with the Hive for the most part. He's gotten a little bit better. It's what the changelings' plan is for the mole. Their plan is, we'll give you all this food. We will give you stuff. And we'll do it in a way to hopefully lead you away. Even though that's wrong from like 3 different angles if you think about it. First of all, it's bribery, which, you know, has its own issues because bribery tends to encourage further bribery, which leads me to the next problem. It is literally appeasement. And appeasement can work, historically. Usually doesn't. Obviously, most of us probably know the word appeasement from World War II, but all you need to do is look up the Danegeld and British history around the time of the Great Heathen Army to give you an idea of how appeasement doesn't freaking work. But then there's the third problem. The process of doing so puts a lot of your people who are not combat ready at risk, and if they're detected in the process, they're screwed. And if they don't get the whole trap set up in time, they're screwed because they will see the food and you'll be like, oh my gosh, this food came from over there. I'm explaining this wrong. Picture for a moment that there's a changeling. Got a whole pile of food on them, right? Puts the food down. And let's say that they get caught in that moment. Oh my gosh. So then they run. And so then the Malwarf chases them back to the hive, knowing that that is now a source of food. Because even if this thing has only dog level of intelligence, it can understand what a source of food is. I mean, that is the problem, Lord Harriman. If you don't have an alternative, then appeasement is the only option. It's that or fleeing or dying, obviously. That's a little bit of a separate concept, but to be perfectly blunt, my statement remains true. Appeasement still doesn't work because it doesn't accomplish anything other than buying a few more X periods of time of survival, which doesn't always work either, while we're on the subject. Because in some cases, what would happen, and this is more true in the older times than it is in modern times, but in some cases, there would be a marauding group that would say, hey, pay us, and you'd be like, okay, here. And then the army would move on, and then another army would move forward, and like, hey, pay us. Like, we just paid you. We just paid your forces. Yeah, but you didn't pay us. We don't have anything left. Oh, we'll just burn your town down and take all your stuff. 30 Years' War is all I gotta say about that one. Thank you, Papa Nix, very much. I'll put that towards Batman Arkham Origins. Oh, thank you, Starbeast Twitch. Oh yeah, the sect. Various sacks of Rome, but I think I know the one in specific you're talking about. Arkham Origins, there we go. My point is, appeasement might be necessary, but it is never it's never the good choice, you know what I mean? It might be something you have to do because you're screwed, and it's that or die, but it's never going to work, especially long term, and the goal should always be to try and find some way to bypass that. Now, if you can't, then life sucks and then you should die, but you get my point. And the Changeling certainly can, and that's why I'm specifically comparing this to the Federation. Because the Federation wasn't in a situation where they had to appease, they just did it. And the Changelings don't have to appease, they're just doing it. You see, I made this comparison very specifically. Now, yeah, the Roddenberry box, oh my gosh. Now, to be clear, some people have actually accused me in my Trek Ruminations of being a warhawk, which is hysterical, by the way. So many reasons. There's a difference between I am in favor of conflict if necessary and I'm a warhawk. I know some people don't understand that particular nuance. I do actually think that in a case, but like both in the Federation and with the Changelings, that they should take a stronger stance. I don't mean they should just run roughshod over every little race they run into and just conquer the galaxy. I do, however, think that going too far the opposite extreme is also bad. It's weird. It's almost like I'm saying that the two extremes are both bad. Huh, how strange. Anyways, by the way, I know the episode's on my side with this, because they have the scene where they talk about, appeasing the Malworth and hoping that works. The very next scene is the Feelings Forum. Now, first of all... Yeah, exactly, Weods. The first thing they do is they have an identity crisis of how this one changeling feels like different colors, but doesn't want to lie to themselves. Can I just say that that's an entire topic by itself that I wish they'd discussed? The idea of an identity crisis for a changeling is actually fascinating, and has real-life applications, because that's how this show works. They don't discuss it, though, so I'm not going to either. It's just something they throw out there as a one-off gag. But the point is, what they do... Damn right, Lord Harriman. I'm right, and they're wrong. No, Oda would probably enjoy the Feelings Forum. I actually agree with that. He wouldn't probably engage in it much, but he would love being there. I could even picture him. He's got that one little pose he does, and he holds his chin in a certain way, and he'd just be watching and paying attention for the whole Feelings Forum. And he would like it, too. Like, he'd get into it. I guarantee it. Anyways. So. This then leads to them all bashing Pharynx behind his back. This is probably the best written part of the entire episode. Well, actually, no. The soup being too hot is the best part of the episode. That actually got a legit laugh out of me. Oh, my soup isn't too hot anymore. Wow, this Feelings Forum really works. What's that old saying? Correlation is not corroboration, something like that. Anyways, that got a real laugh out of me, though. What they are all doing here is they're all bashing Pharynx behind his back. Now, Pharynx then shows up. That's it. Correlation does not equal causation. Thank you. I couldn't remember the exact phrase. They all bash him. Now, I've actually talked about this several times in several works of fiction and in real life. If there is someone who is being ostracized in a group, even if they're doing it themselves, and the whole group's, it just doesn't want everything to do with them, right? They're terrible, and they're awful, and I hate them, and blah, right? That doesn't really encourage them to want to be involved in the group, does it? You're not exactly creating a warm and welcoming environment. Allow me to use another fictional example here, rather than delving into real life. Magneto. Hear me out for a second. How many of you seen First Class, the film? We'll use that exact version. What's going on with my eyes? Jeez Louise. Oh. Well, except for here, Darth Medoro. Yeah, I like that movie, too. I think it's one of the better X-Men movies, which is kind of sad, but it's still true. I love the way they do Shaw in that movie. Anyways. In that film, Magneto... Excuse me, Eric Lehnsherr. He's not called Magneto yet. Eric Lehnsherr is a little messed up because of everything he's gone through. And he's a broken, bitter shell of a human being who barely has control of his powers or his mind or his sense of anything. And what happens is he is found by... oh my god, Xavier. I couldn't think of the actor's name. He's found by Xavier. And what Xavier does is embrace him. Gives him a warm and loving family. Gives him people to care about. And actually takes him in and gives a damn about him. And yeah, the scene with the satellite, right? The reason I bring all this up is Lehnsherr is exactly the kind of person who probably shouldn't belong in a group under standard math because they are so ostracized. But because the group... James McAvoy, thank you. Great actor, by the way. That's why I wanted to mention his name. Because both McAvoy and... oh god, now I can't think of the guy who plays Magneto. Those actors sold that movie for me. They're both fantastic actors. Who absolutely nail it. Even in, like, the Phoenix movie, they somehow managed to be good actors. That's impressive. The Phoenix movie was so terrible. God. Fassbender. That's it. Michael Fassbender. Because he was so opened, because they did the opposite of ostracizing him, but they embraced him, and because Xavier personally embraced him so much and became his best friend, he was able to become a part of that group and to get over some of his issues and yada, yada, yada. Now, obviously, we've always got to have Magneto turn evil, and we're not going to discuss the later movies right now. The point is, That idea is something I've seen presented in real life, and I've actually seen that happen, but it happens in fiction pretty often, which brings us back to Pharynx. What the equivalent here is Xavier is like, Magneto, and then Magneto shows up, and the rest of the X-Men are like, oh, that's Magneto. Oh, God, I hate him, and he's constantly talking about his revenge thing, and I just don't want to have anything to do with him. God, can we get rid of him? Can we kick him out of the school? Is that they didn't have the school yet. Can we kick him out of this government-funded thing we're a part of? Like, imagine if that had happened for a moment. It's not that hard to imagine, because that's actually usually what fiction does, is it presents this idea as presented in this episode. I don't want to use this example, but it is a valid example. This is the same thing that happened to Gul Dukat over in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, before we get into this, let's be clear. Gul Dukat did some horrible, terrible, awful, evil things, and I don't want to dismiss that. But during a period in time in his story arc where he was in the mindset where he could have joined the good guys and actually switched sides and blah, 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 all of them spat on him constantly. All of them did this ostracizing thing. Now, understandably so. He was a disgusting, horrible person, and I don't blame them for that. But I have posited the idea multiple times that if they had instead tried to embrace him, we might have actually legitimately had a change of heart, a change of perspective, and a legitimate redemption for Dukat, as opposed to, well, what we did have. Food for thought. The overall point and relevance to this episode is obvious. Of course Pharynx is acting out. Of course he's being a dick, like throwing black paint onto... Well, that sounds horrible when you say it like that. He's throwing paint of a nondescript color onto one of the changelings. Of course he's trying to tear down the vines. It's because he's acting out. So much of this episode makes sense through the lens of the idea. This is actually Oblivion, I believe. Yeah, I don't have to look. I know this is Oblivion. I know this music. So much of this episode makes so much more sense if you look at it through the lens of the fact that Pharynx has been putting up with being hated this whole time and feels awful for it. And so he acts out, like most people would do, regardless of age. And that makes them hate him more, and that makes him act out more, and 30 go to 10. Oh, Jesus, Ek, that's a topic right there. I disagree with ISB on so many things. That's actually one of the bigger ones. The idea that Dukat was always supposed to be the devil of that show has always been something I've disagreed with. Anyways, sorry. Off topic. Moving on. There is something I disagree with him more, and that's the it was all just a dream thing, but let's not get into that rabbit hole. Point being, the soup cooled down. I mean, it's the same composer and the same series, Mayanasa. Mayanasa? Am I saying that right? So I could see why you would get him confused. The only reason I could distinguish them is I've been listening to them for so long. All three use different sound fonts, so there's a different sound to each of them, for lack of a better way to put it. Like here, I'll put on Morrowind, for example, and this should sound different. If you sit, listen to it for a second. Well, you see Von Falkenstein. We need to kill Von Falkenstein right now. Kill him! Anyways. 20 quatlus to the person who kills Von Falkenstein first. Now, so far the episode's actually been pretty good, in my opinion. Ostracization is a legitimately good topic to discuss, and this show has touched on it before. I don't have any Latin. I only have Republic credits. So the idea of this ostracization and what this is doing to him and the feedback loop and the significance of embracing and all that fun stuff, all of that makes a lot of sense. And it's got some good storytelling, and it's Trixie, and it's Starlight, and it's made me laugh, and it's awesome. And then the episode does the worst thing. I mentioned earlier the second worst thing and the third worst thing. The first worst thing this episode does is Starlight and Trixie just suddenly decide, well, he's beyond saving. I mean, I've talked with him a few minutes, and I think I can say that pretty definitively. What? What? This actively hurts the episode, in my opinion. I get the idea. The idea is this isn't a 40-minute episode, and it probably should have been, or a two-parter, because this is just this arc is being squished into very little time, and that is what's happening here. Let's be honest. But instead of any kind of establishment, they just kind of skip forward, and he's a lost cause, and so that's already problematic. The fact that they sped it up. Then there's the fact that it's Starlight and Trixie who are both agreeing. Let me say that one more time. Starlight and Trixie are both agreeing that someone is lost cause because of everything that we've said previously. Yeah, I know, Bedoro, I know. Although they shouldn't be. Too many television producers don't understand the value and benefit of two-parters. Trek only started getting there late in its career, and when it did, it started putting out much better episodes, in my opinion. Enterprise Season 4 is a good example of that. Late Voyager started doing that too a little bit. Dark Frontier, one of my favorite Voyager episodes, is a two-parter as a consequence of that. Anyways, or maybe it's not Dark Frontier, it's one of the other ones. It's one of the Borg ones. I forget which one. So... okay, that's terrible. Yes, that DS9 did that too. DS9 dipped their toes into that, and arguably, so okay, let's watch. TNG actually started that because TNG did that with, I believe, Gambit was the first one, and Gambit was the big one that got the ball rolling. DS9 did that 4 times. There were two-parters. And then there were the major arcs they did, one around season 6's beginning, I want to say, and then the one at the very end. Then Voyager poked at it a few times, and then Enterprise basically embraced it completely in season 4, and yada yada. Yeah, Chains of Command is the other one. Although, actually, Chains of Command might have been before Gambit. I discount Chains of Command, though, because that was supposed to be the DS9 launch episode. And it wasn't because of timing, but that was why it was built. So that's kind of a season beginner kind of a thing. Anyways, I'm getting way off topic. Two-parters are awesome. Point being, listen, Papaninks, I don't do this. I convince people with her. Now you're gonna... Republic credits will be fine. Anyways, I'm sorry. Getting back to the point. So, because the episode... What, Mr. Red? Because the episode is being squashed so much, a lot of this doesn't work, and the middle part of this episode kinda sucks as a consequence. That being said, did you notice, so Thorax, we do the flashback, and Thorax is there with all the other changelings. Did you notice that he had 3 toys? One of which was a little purple dragon, one of which was a little changeling, and the third of which was Chrysalis. The Chrysalis toy was abandoned and on its side over there while he was playing with the dragon and the changeling toy. I thought that was cute. Yeah, it's straight up symbolism, but it's cute symbolism, and I caught that. That's cute. So Starlight decides to go for a wacky scheme. Now, this is again an example of how this episode is clearly rushed, because that's what this is. This is a wacky scheme, but it's really close to not being a wacky scheme, because to put this as bluntly as I possibly can, sometimes people need to have reality demonstrated to them. It's hard to really process how you will react or how things are if they're just vague ideas. Not everyone can think about something and say, oh, well, that's how this is. Some people need to have something smash them in the face, right? So the idea of engaging in an actual combat here on Mr. Red, never again, of course, because you're leaving forever, because I said don't support me because I do Lorca. The idea of actually demonstrating the nature and danger of this beast and how having a defense force is probably a good idea is a good idea. You know, that's something that has some validity to it. Instead, well, she decides to lure it to the hive because it's... Oh my god, Starlight, what were you thinking? Wacky antics. This then leads to Thorax get a little leadery. I do like the leader, Thorax, to be completely honest. You're coming too. No, actually what happens is Starlight says, I'm coming too, in that whole, I'm gonna help my friend out kind of way. And Thorax's response is, of course you are. This is your fault to begin with. And then Starlight, or it's not Starlight, sorry, Trixie's like, oh, yeah, you know, how could you do that? You're coming too. Oh, well, I mean, you know, I was going to... Who else is coming with me? Now, what's interesting here is what happens next is mostly done for comedic timing, but is still valid, and it's one of the better parts of the episode, I think. Starlight gives a surprisingly decent speech about freedom of choice. All of those changelings are of age that all of them were alive during Sylvanas. Wow. During Chrysalids' reign, right? And so all of them are familiar with not having a choice. They know they have that demonstrated to them, as I talked about earlier. They have that understanding of what it's like to be ordered to do something. In the old ways, Chrysalids would say, go defeat the mole rat. And they would say, okay. Because that's what it was. They were under a tyrant. You got it, Pharynx. Thank you. Very much, as always. So Starlight gives this whole speech about now how they have the power and the freedom. Star Wars Bounty Hunter. In order to choose whether or not they're going to help or whether they're going to do so. And she even bothers to point out that the reason they have that choice is because of the person who's asking for their help. It's a good speech. It's pretty much a Picard speech. Now, they don't go along with it initially. And again, this is why I mentioned this timing thing is mostly done for comedic purposes, because, wow, that was a good speech. Nobody took him on it. The thing is, that does still make sense. One of the most common trends, again, getting back into psychology here, is that people they don't want to bother. Now, I don't mean that in a judgmental way, because I get it. Think about any revolution you've heard in history. Any you've ever studied, or any you've ever read about or watched about or anything, right? You know, the 5 Russian revolutions of the early 1900s, or, you know, the American Revolution, or the massive overhaul that happened in Britain during the 1400s, or whatever, right? Each time historically what happened is things had to get so bad, just so absolutely terrifically awful, that people were pushed past that point where they, yeah, exactly, because the default perspective is, war sucks and I don't want to die. Like, I'm busy. I've got work to do. Tomorrow I'm going to go to the dance, and then we've got this thing, and we've got all this stuff going on, right? I don't want to go do that. And so, real life, historically speaking, people have to be pushed to the point where it's so bad that even the bad of engaging in the activity is now overwhelmed by the bad of not engaging in the activity, and therefore revolution, right? Now, there's other circumstances here, of course, and I don't want to be too dismissive. History is a nice, big, convoluted, complex topic. But my point being, if you have the choice, generally speaking, most people will lean towards not getting involved, because that's a hassle and a mess and a pain, and I don't want to die. I've got another example of this before you, and because I just can't stop referencing Star Trek, it's Quark over in Deep Space Nine. There are several things, especially in the mid-seasons, where Quark is the viewpoint character of the person who doesn't want to die, who doesn't want to get involved. Now, he does, eventually, partially because of circumstances, partially because he's a legitimately good person at heart, but the point being, he doesn't want to get involved. I got my bar, I got my job, I'm trying to make a profit at the end of the day, I'm trying to talk. I don't want to do that. And so it's understandable why, given the choice, when no one is forcing them, they don't go along with it, because they wouldn't. However, it also makes sense why they eventually would. Not just because of comedic timing, but because they are given time to think about it, to process, and to probably debate it amongst themselves off camera. Because it was a good speech, and it was a valid point. The person who you owe a tremendous debt to is asking for your help, and you have the ability to say no because of that person. So, the fact that the speech doesn't work initially, and the fact that the speech works later, actually makes perfect sense. After all, most people aren't going to make a knee-jerk, I decide right now kind of a reaction, despite what the movies will tell you. Most people will probably sit and think about it and process and be like, okay, and then make a decision, which is exactly what happens. Well, I mean, that's true, Darth Medoro, although the episode where he started getting into weapons selling certainly touched on that topic. And he got the hell out of that job, let me tell you what. Probably one of the better Quark episodes. So, they go and they fight the thing. Fight. There's also a nice bit towards the end. This is the last tidbit I have for this episode. Pharynx talks about how he doesn't want to be involved in the feelings for him, and he doesn't want to do any of this namby-pamby crap. Oh my god, do I have to do all this junk? And of course the answer is no. We've actually discussed this exact point just last week. Sharing your feelings does not mean, being all namby-pamby, for lack of a better way to put it. You don't have to be all lovey-dovey and huggy and whatever to be a part of a group, to express your love of being a part of a community, like you all, who are awesome, as a fresh reminder. You don't have to get all sappy. You can just say it truthfully. You can just be there. And that's exactly what he does. He just admits that he likes being part of the crew, and the crew likes him being part of it. It's just, they've been kind of sick of his attitude lately. And so once the attitude is reduced, and he is embraced, guess what happens? And, of course, he looks different. Unfortunately, I don't actually... So I've only seen through the end of this season, as I've mentioned before, and I know for certainty that Pharynx doesn't actually show up again for the rest of Season 7. I don't know if he'll show up in the next 2 seasons. I kind of hope he does. He was an interesting character. We'll see. Don't spoil it for me. I don't want to know. But I am very curious. Regardless, that's the end of the episode. Better and worse than I thought it would be, because that's how that works. Oh yeah, we gotta rate this. Sorry, I was reading Trek Reviewers' comments. I'm trying to understand. So you think she should have turned into Pulaski? I mean, getting Diana Muldaur was probably difficult. But yeah, what do y'all think? What do all think? Because, I mean, there is some good stuff, and this is an arc episode, and I think I've made this clear. But any arc episode is automatically improved by virtue of being an arc episode. That's a plus to the points, or however you want to put that. And it does have several significant failings, but all of those failings could be boiled down to the same thing. It's too squished. Too much has to happen in too little time, and so they rush it, and it hurts the episode. Which is why this isn't red territory for me. It's just... You will not hear me say this often, but this episode could have been red without Starlight. I think this is a rewatch for me. I think this would go on the rewatch list. We need to do that at some point. Omni was talking about that off camera, doing a vote for the rewatch and the VHS list, I'm kind of fine with average. I'm seeing several people saying average. Few people are arguing for orange. What do y'all think? And yeah, so the things that bring this down for me are, the early slanting against Pharynx. Oh no, I don't think this is bad at all. And just the nonsense of Starlight suddenly deciding to be a dick. Rule 0, Starlight, come on. And Trix, I shouldn't let Trixie get away, because Trixie does the exact same thing. Both of them just immediately jump over that. What's a DVD, Darth Medoro? All I have is a Blu-ray. Actually, I think I do have a DVD player in there, but it's an external, and it's only there for emergencies. Listen, all I'm saying is Starlight is the worst MLP character ever made, and that's why she's the best character on the show. All right. I'm thinking yellow. I think I kind of agree with the consensus here. This is an average episode. It's got some flaws, but it's got some good parts. And let's be honest, that is pretty average, right, for a TV show. Next episode, I actually already wrote this written down. That was by, sorry, let me pull that. That was by Kevin Lappin, who actually wrote Honest Apple, which I wasn't a huge fan of. Next up, we have, where's that list? I was just looking at it. Daring Done, which is by G.M. Barrow, who has written the one where Pinkie Pie knows, which was a good episode, and Fluttershy Leans In, which was blue. You remember that one? That's her building the Wilderlife Preserve thing, if you were wondering. Yeah. So we'll see. I don't really have any expectations. I barely have memories of this episode, to be completely honest with you. So, we'll find out in about 25 minutes.